The deaf boy was left behind by his own father, but an old dog sniffed out the truth. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Richard Caldwell, a powerful businessman who owns a chain of private clinics and genetic labs. He's tall, with neatly combed grey hair, a stern face, and an expression that never softens. Richard is the picture of success and control. He never smiles, he never hugs, he never slows down. In the same house lives his son, Tommy, just 6 years old. He's a thin boy with bright blue eyes and blonde hair like wheat in the summer. Tommy was born deaf. He can't hear the birds sing or his father's voice. He lives in a world without sound, but his mind is full of colors, images, and a tenderness no one seems to notice. The day the doctor said congenital deafness, something broke inside Richard, though he never showed it. Tommy's mother, Sarah, died hours after childbirth due to complications that could have been prevented. Richard loved her deeply. With her death and Tommy's diagnosis, something in him shut down. Richard never accepted his son's condition. For him, perfection is a rule, not a choice. He hired the best teachers, therapists, and doctors, but he refused to learn sign language or truly connect with his son. Soon he began to see those efforts as a waste of money. Little Tommy wanders the mansion's wide hallways, always clutching a sketchbook. He draws constantly. Houses, dogs, trees, and one figure he repeats over and over. A woman with wings he calls Mommy Angel. He doesn't understand why his father never looks him in the eye, why he doesn't speak with his hands, why he leaves him to eat alone. In a heartbreaking scene, Tommy walks into the dining room one morning and sees the table set for just one person. He waits. He glances at the grandfather clock. The butler, Henry, motions for him to eat. Resigned, Tommy sits alone. He breaks his bread. His eyes search for his father, but Richard has already left for work without saying goodbye. The staff watch him with pity, but no one dares defy the boss. Only the old housekeeper, Mrs. Ellen Harper, sometimes leaves him a heart-shaped cookie or sits with him while he draws. One day, Tommy stops by a window overlooking the garden. Outside, a stray dog barks in the distance. He can't hear it, but he sees its wagging tail and playful jumps. Tommy smiles. For a moment, his face lights up, but when he turns around, he sees his father standing behind him, staring with disapproval. Richard says coldly, knowing Tommy can't hear, "You don't need dogs or drawings. You need to learn how to behave." And he walks away. Day after day in this house full of luxury, little Tommy grows up in a palace where silence isn't peace, it's punishment. Time passes and Tommy turns 7. There's no party, no cake. Just a blank card left on his breakfast tray by the butler, Henry. With a special kind of sensitivity, Tommy notices every absence, every cold gesture, every look that avoids him. The silence no longer hurts him. It has taught him to endure. Tommy wakes up alone each morning. He dresses alone. He walks the long, cold hallways of the Caldwell mansion without expecting company. His world is small, confined by white walls, strict rules, and his father's constant indifference. Richard continues his life as a successful businessman, leaving home at dawn and returning late, often without even glancing at his son. In an important scene, Tommy tries to show his father a drawing, a picture of the two of them holding hands. Richard barely looks at it, his face emotionless, and mutters as if talking to himself, "This won't change anything, Tommy." The boy doesn't understand the words, but he feels the hardness in his father's eyes. He strokes the paper sadly, folds it carefully and tucks it into his secret sketchbook. The therapies have been cancelled. Richard believes Tommy isn't improving and that the costs are too high for something without a future. When a young therapist tries to tell him about Tommy's emotional progress through art and sign language, Richard cuts her off coldly. "I'm not going to keep feeding illusions. My son needs discipline, not pats on the back." The therapist leaves with tears in her eyes. Tommy watches her from the window, sketching her goodbye. During lunch, Mrs. Ellen Harper, the housekeeper, tries to teach Tommy some basic signs. "Eat, water, please, thank you." The boy learns quickly. His mind is sharp and intuitive, but it's all done in secret. Richard forbids sign language in the house, calling it a sign of weakness. One night, Mrs. Harper finds Tommy asleep on his bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered drawings. Among them is one that chills her. A small boy standing on a dark road with a car driving away in the distance. She picks up the paper, hides it, and that night, writes an anonymous letter to a child protection agency, but she doesn't send it. Something stops her. Fear, loyalty, or maybe resignation. One morning, Richard receives an invitation to an international conference in Chicago. It's a chance for prestige. As he reads the date, he glances up and sees Tommy sitting alone in the garden, trying to copy a butterfly's flight in his sketchbook. "I can't keep going like this," Richard murmurs to himself. "I have to make a decision." That decision, however, will spark a tragedy. It was a heavy afternoon, with a sky full of unmoving clouds and a silence so thick it seemed to warn of coming trouble. Richard Caldwell sat in his office, facing a window that overlooked the artificial lake in the garden. In his hands were an expensive glass of bourbon and a folder with travel documents. On his desk lay a child's passport next to 2 plane tickets. Destination cancelled. It was all part of a carefully planned lie. For weeks, Richard had been thinking the unthinkable. In his mind, the decision wasn't cruel, it was practical. He justified it as a necessary cut. He told himself life had to move on, free of emotional burdens or sentimentality. He repeated like a mantra that Tommy deserved another chance somewhere else. But in truth, the only way out he saw was to get rid of his son. To the staff, he announced a father-son bonding trip. Even Mrs. Harper, who had her suspicions, felt a moment of relief. For the first time, Richard seemed to want to spend time with the boy. On the day of the supposed trip, Tommy woke up earlier than usual. He was excited. Though he couldn't hear, he understood Mrs. Harper's enthusiastic gestures as she showed him a small suitcase and helped him pack some drawings, clean clothes, and his worn-out teddy bear. That suitcase meant something new to him, the chance to be seen. Richard didn't allow long goodbyes. He ordered the driver to take them to a quiet spot where he would take the wheel himself. He said he wanted privacy for a father-son moment. Mrs. Harper watched the car pull away, and for a moment, her gut screamed that something was wrong. But she said nothing. On the road, the landscape grew wilder, farther from the city. Tommy stared out the window, fascinated by tall trees and distant mountains. He didn't ask questions. He couldn't. But he looked at his father with a spark of hope. Richard avoided his gaze, gripping the steering wheel as if his soul weighed more than the car. They passed a gas station, then an unmarked crossroad. Finally, they reached a forgotten stretch of state forest where the pavement turned to gravel and dry leaves. There, in the middle of nowhere, Richard stopped the car. He turned off the engine. "Get out, Tommy," he said, almost without voice. The boy looked at him, confused. He smiled, thinking they were going to camp or maybe look at the stars. He grabbed his sketchbook, his teddy bear, and got out obediently. Richard opened the trunk, pulled out Tommy's suitcase, and left it on the ground. Then he returned to the car. For a moment he sat with his hands trembling on the wheel. His lips whispered Sarah's name as if asking for permission. Tommy stood there, holding his sketchbook in one hand and his teddy bear in the other, waiting for instructions. Richard started the engine, and without looking back, without a word, he sped off. The sound of tires on gravel faded quickly. Tommy was left alone. Surrounded by trees, he didn't understand he'd been abandoned. He thought his father had gone to get something, that he'd come back. He sat on the ground, took out his sketchbook, drew a car coming back, and waited. The sun began to sink behind the pine trees, casting a golden glow over the damp forest floor. Shadows stretched long, and the chill felt like a quiet warning of what was coming. Tommy, still not understanding what had happened, sat next to his little suitcase. His trembling fingers flipped through his sketchbook, but he wasn't drawing anymore. He just stared at the pages, as if searching for an explanation. A few miles away, in a quiet cabin by a calm lake, lived Jack Sullivan, a man in his 50s, strong but weathered by time. He'd been a dog trainer for rescue and combat units, known for his skill, precision, and kindness. But since the tragic death of his only daughter, Lily, in a mountain accident 3 years ago, Jack had cut himself off from the world. His only companion was Max, a graying German shepherd with wise eyes and a veteran soul. Max had been his partner in countless missions. Together, they saved lives under rubble, in fires, in disaster zones. Now, the dog lived in well-earned retirement, but his instincts never faded. That evening, while Jack chopped wood in silence, Max suddenly lifted his head. Something stirred him. He stood, sniffing the air hard. His ears perked up, his body alert. Jack noticed. "What's wrong, old boy?" he asked, not expecting an answer. Max let out a low growl, walked to the door and looked back, as if urging Jack to understand the urgency. "We can't go out now. It's late and a storm's coming." But Max insisted. He pawed at the door, pacing nervously. Jack sighed, defeated by the deep bond they still shared. "All right, but just a few minutes." Without a leash, Max bolted out, running as if guided by an invisible force. Jack could barely keep up in his old pickup truck, driving down dirt paths he hadn't traveled in years. In the forest, Tommy was starting to feel the cold. He hugged himself, curled up next to his suitcase. The sky darkened, and small movements in the bushes scared him. He couldn't hear them, but he felt them. The ground's vibrations, the rustling leaves. Something inside him was starting to fade. He closed his eyes, overcome by the cold. And then, like a miracle from a storybook, Max appeared through the trees. The dog approached carefully, sniffing the air. Tommy opened his eyes slowly and saw him. He didn't know where the dog came from, but he wasn't afraid. Max came closer, tilting his head with curiosity. Tommy raised a shaky hand and gently touched the dog's warm fur. His fingers curled into the thick coat. For the first time since he was abandoned, he wasn't alone. Max sat beside him, then lay down, shielding him slightly with his body. Tommy rested his head on the dog. The animal's warmth was like a hug, a silent promise of protection. Jack arrived minutes later, his flashlight cutting through the path. When he saw his dog next to a small, still figure, his heart stopped. "Hey, hey!" he shouted, running toward them. When he reached them, he saw Tommy's blue eyes looking at him with fear and confusion. The boy didn't react to his voice. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just breathed. Jack checked him quickly. He didn't seem hurt, just exhausted and freezing. He lifted the boy carefully, while Max walked beside him like a loyal soldier. In the truck, Jack wrapped Tommy in his jacket. He looked at Max, who had jumped into the back seat and kept his eyes on the boy. "You found him, you saved him again, buddy." And without knowing it, in that moment an unbreakable bond had begun to form between a boy who couldn't hear and a dog who didn't need to speak. The next morning dawned under a thick fog that crept through the trees like a secret kept by the forest. Inside the cabin, all was calm. Tommy slept on the couch, wrapped in a heavy blanket, his small body pressed against Max's warm side. The dog, with half-closed but watchful eyes, breathed slowly, as if knowing his job wasn't done. Jack Sullivan watched them from the kitchen, holding a coffee mug, his face hardened by emotions he'd spent years pushing down. Something about this boy, his fragility, his silence, his way of seeking comfort in another living being, stirred old memories in his soul. He thought of his daughter, Lily, how she'd been joyful and sensitive too, how he'd lost her without being able to do anything. Unsure what to do, Jack called an old friend, Mike Dawson, a trusted truck driver who passed through the area now and then. He asked him to come quietly. He wanted to take the boy to a rural medical center, but wasn't ready to involve the police yet, not until he understood what was going on. When Mike arrived, he parked his truck outside the cabin and walked in, taking off his cap with respect. He was a big man with a weathered face, but a natural warmth in his gestures. When he saw the boy asleep on the dog, he froze. "Good Lord," he whispered, moved. Without asking, he pulled out his phone. "Jack, buddy, don't say anything, just look at this." He pressed the button softly. The click was barely a breath. The image was captured. Tommy clinging to Max like they were one, wrapped in a scene of heartbreaking tenderness. Hours later, still shaken, Mike posted the photo online with a simple caption. "I don't know who this kid is, or why he was alone in the woods. I just know this old dog found him and didn't leave him. Love doesn't need words." No one could have predicted what came next. First, a few likes, then dozens of comments. Within an hour, the photo had been shared thousands of times. The story spread across counties, reaching animal rescue groups, deaf advocacy organizations, and local news pages. People demanded answers. Who was this boy? Where were his parents? The image reached newsrooms in Portland and Sacramento, then made it to national broadcasts. But it was in the Caldwell mansion where the shock hit hardest. Mrs. Harper was tidying the living room when she got a text. She opened the image. Her phone nearly slipped from her hands. "My God, it's Tommy," she cried, her voice breaking, dropping the vase she was holding. In that moment, she knew her worst fears were true. Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell was giving vague answers to a couple of business reporters about a supposed corporate emergency. But his phone buzzed. He saw the image. His face went pale. The wine glass in his hand trembled noticeably. The past was coming to collect. Back at the cabin, Jack checked his laptop, unaware of the post's reach. Someone had edited the photo with a powerful caption. "The boy no one listened to found someone to hold him." Jack closed the screen. He turned to Tommy, now awake, stroking Max's head. The boy smiled silently, and for the first time Jack felt like maybe life was giving him a second chance. The doors of the Caldwell mansion slammed shut as Richard paced the hallways like a cornered animal. The photo of his son online had not only shattered his carefully crafted lie, but now threatened his reputation. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages, calls, notifications from reporters, lawyers, acquaintances, all asking the same thing. Where's Tommy? Inside, Richard felt something new. Fear. Not fear of punishment, but of scandal, of public judgment, of losing control. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper, her face pale, marched to the office with purpose. In her hand was a yellow envelope she'd kept for years. Medical records, old school reports, letters from Sarah, Tommy's mother, written before she died, begging Richard to protect their son. They were never read, but now they would see the light. "I can't stay quiet anymore, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "No more." "Be quiet, Ellen," Richard shouted, slamming his desk. "You don't know what you're talking about. This isn't your business. That boy lived in this house like a ghost, and you left him to die inside. But he survived, and now the whole world sees him." Richard sank into his chair, running a hand over his face. In his mind, the abandonment had been final. He never imagined the boy would survive, that someone would find him, or that someone would hold him with love. That night, the Department of Child Services, along with county police, arrived at the mansion. An anonymous tip, combined with the viral photo, had set off alarms. A young officer, stern-faced, showed the court order. "Mr. Caldwell, you need to come with us to answer questions. There are serious inconsistencies in your story. Your son was found in a state of abandonment. This is serious." Richard tried to stay calm, but his face betrayed him. For the first time, his lies crumbled in front of everyone. At the cabin, Jack watched from the doorway as 2 officers and a social worker entered quietly. Tommy, seeing the uniforms, hid behind Max. The dog stood firm, as if guarding sacred ground. "It's okay, little guy," Jack said softly. "No one's taking you from him." The social worker, a woman with red hair and a kind face named Lisa Carter, knelt to Tommy's level. She didn't speak. She raised her hands and, with a warm smile, began signing in ASL. Tommy blinked, surprised, and for the first time in days he responded. He signed back shyly, as if unlocking something forgotten inside him. Lisa understood. "He says the dog saved him. He doesn't want to leave without him," she translated, her voice tight with emotion. Jack clenched his fists. He wasn't about to let Tommy become another victim of the system. The officers saw the case's delicacy. An urgent hearing would be scheduled. For now, Tommy would stay in Jack's temporary care, with Max. Days later, highway cameras confirmed everything. Richard's car parked in a remote area, the man opening the trunk, leaving Tommy alone and driving away. The scandal spread like wildfire across the news. Public opinion split between outrage and disbelief. How could such a powerful man do this? How had no one noticed the emotional neglect before? Where were the authorities? Mrs. Harper finally handed Sarah's letters to the investigators. The full story broke free like a river bursting through a dam, and so the Caldwell empire began to crumble, not from financial ruin, but from the truth of a boy and the silent love of a dog. The county courthouse was wrapped in tense silence. Outside, TV cameras waited like vultures, aimed at the main entrance where Richard Caldwell would soon face the court, charged with aggravated child abandonment, neglect, and obstruction of justice. His image, once a symbol of power and success, was now that of a broken, shamed man. Inside, the courtroom was somber. Dark wood walls, heavy curtains, and an air thick with anticipation. Among those present, Jack Sullivan sat upright, wearing a simple shirt, his hands clasped. Beside him, Tommy, dressed in clean clothes and a navy sweater, clutched a worn teddy bear's ear tightly. Max wasn't there. Court rules didn't allow it, but his absence felt like a hole in the air. The judge, Susan Bennett, was a woman with white hair tied in a neat bun and sharp blue eyes that saw everything. Despite her stern look, there was a quiet softness in her gaze. Reviewing the documents, She glanced at Tommy for a moment. Then she fixed her eyes on Richard, who tried to hide his trembling hands. "Mr. Caldwell," she said firmly, "you have failed not only as a father, but as a human being. This court will never tolerate or excuse the abandonment of a child. The evidence is clear: cameras, witness statements, the letters from the boy's late mother. It all points to one thing. You tried to erase your own son." Richard swallowed hard. For a second, he seemed about to speak, but he didn't. He just lowered his head, wrapped in his own silent guilt. The judge continued, "As for temporary custody, we've reviewed the boy's current environment and the psychological reports from the forensic team and social worker, Lisa Carter. The child has responded positively to the care of Mr. Jack Sullivan. The emotional bond with him, and with the dog who stayed with him during his abandonment, has been described as deep, stable, and vital for his recovery." A murmur rippled through the room. "Therefore," Judge Bennett declared with gravity, "this court grants temporary custody of the minor, Tommy Caldwell, to Mr. Sullivan, with the right to begin the process for permanent adoption within the legal time frame." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the lump in his throat. Tommy looked at him closely. In a shy gesture, he raised his small hands to form a sign Jack was just starting to learn. "Dad." The former trainer couldn't hold back his tears. His life, long marked by loneliness and guilt, was finding new meaning. Outside the courthouse, as they slipped out a side door to avoid the press, Lisa waited with a smile. Max, brought by Jack's assistant, stood up when he saw Tommy and ran to him. Tommy dropped his bag, knelt and hugged the dog tightly. The moment was caught by a photographer hiding in the bushes, and within hours, it would circle the world. The caption that went with the image online was simple but timeless. "The boy is no longer alone." It was fall in the Pacific Northwest. Leaves fell in slow spirals onto the roof of Jack's cabin, painting the landscape in shades of copper and gold. Life in that house had changed. Where there was once the echo of silence and absence, now there were small footsteps, quiet laughter, and the constant presence of a boy beginning to open his heart to the world. Tommy no longer slept curled up on the couch. He had his own room, decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and a mural he'd painted with Lisa's help. A forest, a wooden house, a bearded man, a dog with a hero's cape, and himself, smiling, hands reaching for the sky. Jack had turned his home into a haven of quiet love. Though he struggled at first to remember each sign in ASL, he practiced every night. Lisa, now a frequent visitor, taught them both with patience and care. At the dining table, no words were spoken, but hands danced more smoothly each day. Water, thank you. Sleep, I love you. Max remained the faithful guardian. During lessons, he sat at Tommy's feet, as if he, too, wanted to learn. And he seemed to understand everything, wagging his tail whenever Tommy signed his name proudly. One afternoon, Lisa suggested something unexpected. The School for Deaf Children in Pinewood Valley is holding a fall festival. They're putting on a visual theater performance. Would Tommy like to join? Jack frowned. The idea of exposing the boy to strangers still worried him. But Tommy, seeing Lisa's hands form the word theater, lit up. He nodded eagerly, then ran to his room and returned with a drawing. Him and Max on a stage under a shower of stars. The answer was clear. The next few days were filled with rehearsals. Lisa adapted a simple story about a boy lost in the woods who finds a magical dog that teaches him to communicate without speaking. Tommy would be the star. Max, of course, would join him. It wasn't a typical play. It used gestures, soft music, and light. On the night of the festival, the auditorium was packed with families, teachers, and curious neighbors. Jack, sitting in the front row, couldn't hide his nerves. He wore a shirt Lily had embroidered years ago, a way to keep her close for this big moment. When the curtain rose, a deep silence fell over the room. Tommy appeared on stage, barefoot, holding a flashlight. He walked among painted cardboard trees, searching for something. Then Max entered from the other side. The audience held its breath. No words were needed. The movements, the looks, the pauses, they said more than 1,000 sentences. And when Tommy, at the end, signed, "Love isn't heard, it's felt," the entire theater erupted in applause. Lisa cried. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. Jack's eyes were red, unable to hold back his feelings. And Max, sitting on stage, turned to Tommy and, as if rehearsed, rested his head on the boy's shoulder. The ovation was long and heartfelt. That night, Tommy's story spread again, not as a tragedy but as a testament to hope. Newspapers called him the boy who overcame silence, and social media filled with messages from families, teachers, and young people with disabilities. His story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone. It was a clear winter morning. The sky was almost transparent, and a thin layer of frost covered the grass outside Jack's cabin. Inside, the fireplace's warmth wrapped the home in a gentle silence. Tommy, as he did every day, sat by the window with his sketchbook, joined by Max, who slept at his feet with a soft, rhythmic snore. Jack was making breakfast when he heard tires crunching on the gravel. He wasn't expecting visitors. Frowning, he wiped his hands on a rag and went to the door. When he opened it, he found Lisa Carter, her face serious, holding a letter. "Lisa, what's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. She handed him the envelope. It had Jack's name written in blue ink, the handwriting firm but shaky. "It's from Richard Caldwell," she said quietly. "From prison." Jack held the letter for a few seconds without opening it. The weight of that name still hung like a shadow over them all. Finally, with a deep sigh, he tore it open and began to read. The letter was short. It didn't ask for pity or make excuses, just raw truth and a bitter confession. "Jack, I don't expect your forgiveness, or Tommy's, but I want you to know that that night in the wood, I broke. It wasn't out of hate. It was fear. Fear of loving what I didn't understand. Fear of not being enough to raise someone so fragile. And in the end, I was the fragile one. I saw the news. I saw the play. I saw my son communicate without speaking. And I realized the silence wasn't his. It was mine. Thank you for being the man I couldn't be. I just wanted to tell him before it's too late. I always loved him, even if I never knew how to show it. I'm not worthy of anything, but if Tommy ever asks about me, tell him his father was a coward who learned too late." The words hung in the room like a cold whisper. Jack lowered the paper slowly. Lisa watched him, a lump in her throat. "Are you going to show it to him?" she asked. Jack tucked the letter into a small wooden box Lily had made when she was a child. "Not yet, but someday, maybe, when he's ready to understand." Later that afternoon, Tommy found Jack on the porch watching the sunset. He sat beside him and, without a word, rested his head on Jack's arm. Jack stroked his hair. Then Tommy raised his hands and signed slowly. "Will my dad, come back?" Jack took a deep breath. With clumsy but honest hands, he signed back. "No, but he wrote to you." Tommy looked down. He didn't ask to see it. He just hugged Max tighter. Minutes passed without words. The sun sank behind the trees, leaving only a golden glow on their faces. Tommy signed again first. "I already have a dad." And Jack, for the first time in a long time, let himself smile, without sadness. Spring arrived in Pinewood Valley, with a quiet sweetness. The air carried the scent of orange blossoms, the distant mountains began to turn green, and Jack Sullivan's once lonely cabin now hummed with new life. Every corner of the home bore the mark of a reclaimed childhood, drawings taped to the walls, toys arranged with a child's logic, picture books adapted for visual reading. And always, in a sunny spot, Max watching with his wise eyes. Tommy turned 8. It was the first time he celebrated his birthday surrounded by people who didn't just look at him, but saw him. The small party in the garden was simple, but heartfelt. Lisa baked a carrot cake. Mike, the truck driver who took the famous photo, brought balloons and a new flashlight for camping nights. Mrs. Harper, her eyes teary, arrived with a hand-knit scarf and a smile that said more than words. Tommy wore a t-shirt with his own drawing printed on it. Him, Jack, and Max under a starry sky. When he blew out the candles, silently but with a look of triumph, everyone clapped. Max barked once, perfectly timed. No one could help laughing. After the cake, Lisa knelt beside Tommy with a small package wrapped in blue paper. "It's something special, little guy," she signed, speaking too. "It's a book, but not just any book." Tommy opened it carefully. Inside was an album of photos and clippings, pictures from the theatre festival, his first ASL classes, Max in different moments of the year. On the last page was a blank sheet with a single line in black ink. "Your story is just beginning." Tommy touched the page. Then he raised his hands and signed, "Can I write it?" Jack, standing behind him, nodded with quiet emotion. "You're already writing it, son," he said, pulling him into a strong, warm hug. That night, under a clear sky, Jack and Tommy sat on the porch, as they often did, sharing a blanket over their legs. Max lay at their feet, calm. Tommy pulled out a paper airplane he'd been working on for days. On its wings, he'd written in colored markers, "Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Dad." Then silently, he launched it into the wind. The plane soared in a spiral, riding the breeze until it vanished among the stars. Jack watched it disappear. Then he looked at Tommy, who was smiling with his eyes closed. And in that moment, he knew for certain that though the world had failed many times, something bigger had stepped in. Tommy's silence was never empty. It was a seed, and it had finally bloomed. 5 years have passed since that night when a veteran dog found a lost boy in the woods. 5 springs in which life, with patience and love, rebuilt what others had torn down. Tommy Sullivan, yes, he now officially carries Jack's last name, is 13. He's no longer the fragile boy who hid behind his sketchbook. Though still reserved, his eyes now shine with confidence. He attends an inclusive school in Willow Creek, where he not only signs fluently in ASL, but also teaches other kids to do the same. He's loved, respected, admired. He runs a visual blog where he shares illustrated stories inspired by his childhood, signing as the boy from the woods. His work has been featured at book fairs, always paired with the image the world never forgot. Him and Max, sleeping together under the trees. Jack still lives in his cabin, now a home full of life. He wrote a book about his journey as an adoptive father and advocate for children's rights, which was turned into a documentary. He also supports families with deaf children, alongside Lisa Carter, who became his partner in life and mission. Max, the silent hero, passed away 2 years ago. He fell asleep peacefully at Tommy's feet one winter morning and didn't wake up. They buried him in the forest, under the same oak where Tommy was found. On his headstone, Jack wrote, "Here rests the one who listened without ears and spoke without voice." The pain of his loss was deep, but didn't destroy. Because Max left more than his presence, he left loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. Richard Caldwell remains in prison. Since the letter he wrote, he hasn't reached out again. He lives in isolation, avoids interviews, refuses visitors. But every year, on Tommy's birthday, an envelope arrives at the school. No sender. Inside, always a folded sheet with a simple drawing. A tree, a boy, and a dog. Nothing else, no signature. Tommy never asks who sends it, but he always keeps the paper in his album. And so, a story that began with a wound became a beautiful scar, a mark that doesn't hurt but reminds. Because not all silences are sad. Some hold love, memory, and redemption. And Tommy's was the deepest of all, the one that turned abandonment into a family, the one that turned a bark into a destiny, the one that taught the world that sometimes, to truly listen, you have to be silent. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.